From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Madeline Holler. Tonight, we take a look back at the top sustainability story, from one power company's plans to store solar energy to how to photograph our beautiful wildflowers.
Energy innovation brought national leaders to our state late last week. Cronkite News reporter Lillian Donahue reports on how APS is looking to bring energy from the sun to Arizona homes after dark.
Despite a downpour, U.S. Secretary of Energy Rick Perry visited with APS on Friday. Perry toured through a renewable energy storage facility nearly 50 miles west of Phoenix. That's where APS announced one of the largest battery storage initiatives in the country.
The holy grail of this whole renewable energy quest is in battery storage.
APS plans to bring solar energy to more than 1 million customers even after dark. The company promises 950 megawatts of renewable energy storage in the coming years.
The announcement that we made is the equivalent of powering 275,000 homes.
Now, batteries you're used to are the ones that are in my microphone that look like this. However, APS is taking it to a greater scale, implementing more than 500 batteries like this across the valley and Arizona. That's the equivalent of storage from 3 million solar panels. But it's hard to hold on to the sun's power when it sets. That's where finding a way to temporarily store this energy on a mass scale comes in.
So we are inside of APS's Festival Ranch battery storage system. Coupling storage and solar, or storage and renewables together, is what allows us to truly unlock the promise of that renewable energy source.
Leaders at APS say their investment in clean energy storage won't cost residents more than they're already paying.
It certainly costs money, but the great news is that energy storage costs have declined to the point where it's competitive with other sources of generation.
The company plans to add batteries to its existing solar plants by 2020 and build new storage facilities across the state by 2025. In Phoenix, Lillian Donahue, Cronkite News.
Today, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Grand Canyon's designation as a national park. We're taking a look at efforts to protect the land, as well as how two women are celebrating the birthday in a unique way. But first, Jody Guerrero explains just what a visit means to the park for those who see its majesty in person.
At 227 miles long, the Grand Canyon has been a must-see destination, inspiring people from all over the world to see the canyon with their own eyes.
I walked up and opened my eyes and it was breathtaking. It's wild to think that we didn't create this, that this is something that was created out of nature, and it was breathtaking. It was magical.
Roger Clark is the program director for the nonprofit conservation organization, the Grand Canyon Trust. He recommends that visitors try something new and go below the rim of the canyon.
Just 100 yards down the trail and you'll begin to see things you couldn't even imagine.
Nearly 100,000 visitors do venture into the canyon and stay the night below the rim. That's according to recent numbers from the park. At the Grand Canyon, Jody Guerrero, Cronkite News.
A bill that's planned to be introduced to Congress could prevent uranium mining on more than 1 million acres of land around the Grand Canyon. And as Cronkite News reporter Lillian Donahue reports, this is something representatives and tribes in northern Arizona call long overdue.
Thank you. A year ago, we traveled to the bottom of the Grand Canyon to talk with people of the Havasupai tribe. For years, they've expressed their concerns for uranium mining near their ancestral lands. Now, lawmakers are taking action, saying the tribe's voices are not unheard.
Havasupai means people of the blue-green water, and we have been living here for over thousands of years.
Hundreds of Havasupai tribal members live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. They say it's the future of their tribe and they want to protect their sacred water. But for decades, many Native communities in northern Arizona have expressed concerns over uranium mining just miles from the Grand Canyon National Park.
And we have a sacred duty to protect the land and the Grand Canyon.
Now legislators are taking notice. Congressman and chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, Raul Grijalva, is introducing a bill today on the 100th anniversary of the park.
To protect the Grand Canyon, protect its watershed, protect the resource of the Colorado River.
The bill would make a temporary ban on uranium mining set in place during the Obama administration permanent.
Although it's printed on one sheet, front and back, you could say this bill is relatively small, but the Grand Canyon Centennial Protection Act will have big implications on the Grand Canyon and surrounding areas, taking federally recognized land over 1 million acres out of the equation for uranium mining.
The risks associated with uranium mining dramatically outweigh any of the benefits to this region or to this nation.
A recent report by the Grand Canyon Trust cited multiple contaminated mines around the national park. One of those, the Canyon Mine, remains active and even flooded in 2017. The mine's parent company, Energy Fuels, had to remove more than 1 million gallons of tainted water from the area.
The legacy of contamination associated with uranium mining is tragic.
However, Arizona's 4th Congressional District Representative Paul Gosar released a statement calling the permanent ban on uranium mining a misguided quest that would, quote, undermine American energy security.
Because it's a cause.
Despite past preservation attempts in the Grand Canyon, Representative Grijalba says he's confident and has a message for his colleagues on Capitol Hill.
To think of the Grand Canyon not in terms of a piece of federal land that they should open up as a commodity for drilling, for mining, and for extraction. They should think of it as a treasure that they need to comfort and take care of.
A bipartisan poll conducted in August asked 600 registered voters in Arizona whether or not they support the continuation of a uranium ban near the Grand Canyon. The majority of Arizonans responded in favor of the moratorium, while 29% of them said that locking up land from mining companies would actually stifle job creation and local economies.
The recent snow in Arizona's high country has reduced drought in parts of the state. But as Cronkite News reporter Bane Froney explains, snow has also raised concerns about flooding.
A record 40 inches of snow fell in Flagstaff last week. That's not very uncommon, according to Ken Waters. He's a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. Waters says this is the first time in 9 years that Arizona has had above average precipitation.
It usually melts slowly, and so it helps to really recharge a lot of the water supplies, and it's a good thing, and that's helping to help lessen any effects of the drought that we have.
Arizona has been in a drought for 19 years, but this week's U.S. Drought Monitor report shows that far northeastern Arizona is out of extreme drought. Still, drought is a concern.
We're pretty good stewards of the water that we receive and our conjunctive use of surface water and groundwater. And so we've been able to preserve the reservoir levels throughout this long-term drought that we've had.
Waters says even in a drought, flooding is possible as temperatures continue to rise throughout the valley.
We do have one area that is a concern here in Arizona, and that's Tonto Creek, area in southern Gila County. And for that reason, we have put out a warning for that area going out through Sunday.
Yesterday, the Salt River Project began releasing water from 2 reservoirs on the Verde River to create more room for snowmelt and future runoff. Meanwhile, first responders gathered this week at the White Tank National Park to practice an emergency drill.
The thing is, these teams don't normally work together, so this gives them an opportunity to see what kind of areas they need to improve on.
Tim Clarkowski is a police sergeant with the City of Surprise. He says this drill covered everything from how to respond to drug cartel operations to how to handle unexpected flooding.
In future drills, we're going to start looking at some of those actual hands-on sort of exercises where now we're putting people to the test at swift water rescues for flooding, for example.
Potential flooding could happen in the weeks to come, but Waters says for now he's keeping a watchful eye for potential storms coming into Arizona next week. He warns drivers to be safe on the roads, especially when it's raining. Bane Froney, Cronkite News.
If you live in the high country, you know how much snow has fell recently because, well, chances are you shoveled your walkway. But it's much harder to get a good read on snowpacks in Arizona's wild places. That's why a team of researchers at the University of Arizona are working hard to find ways to track every inch of snowpack across the U.S. Cronkite News reporter Jody Guerrera explains.
There's a lot at stake when it comes to how much snow is on the ground. A bad snowpack means less water for reservoirs and rivers. And in a time of drought, every drop matters. Right now, volunteers and government employees around the country are measuring snowpack. University of Arizona researchers are combining that data and building on it. University of Arizona professor Zubin Zhang leads this study. He says his team's work will change how people keep track of snowpack in the future.
Before, we only have good measurements over specific points, say your own backyard. Now, if you want to tell your neighbors what the snowpack change for your neighborhoods and adjacent areas, you don't know because your backyard could be different from your neighbors.
Zhang says his data provides that answer.
Not for your backyard, but for your neighborhood and surrounding areas. And we can do that for every neighborhood in the U.S.
The cold work took place out in the field, while others compiled data in the lab. Then they mapped changes in snow mass across the U.S. over 35 years onto 2.5 by 2.5 mile square grids. Zhang and his team have discovered some decline in snowpack in the West.
There are areas, large areas, having significant snowpack decline, and we need to take actions.
The team has been collecting snowpack data since 1981. Zhang says there hasn't been a decline in snowpack in the eastern U.S.
Most of the areas do not see the significant decrease.
But there is enough decline in areas in the West. If you add them up, it's the same size as South Carolina. Associate research scientist Patrick Broxton says they often use creative technology for measurements.
A number of my colleagues are working with drones, and we just thought it would be a good way to measure snow depth because they're using it for similar types of purposes.
These researchers are so passionate about their studies because their findings could help predict changes in the water cycle and climate change. Here in Arizona, snowmass directly impacts the Colorado River.
Less snowpack means less water through the Colorado River. That means less water for Arizona.
While the snow may look deep, the trends over years are what really tell the true story of snow. In Tucson, Jody Guerrero, Cronkite News.
The researchers at the University of Arizona are collaborating with NASA. They want to send a satellite into space to help track snowpack.
The forest in Flagstaff is riddled with trees marked to be cut down. As Nicole Hernandez reports, the trees are being removed in a unique way. Take a look.
This is a normal day on the job for Dave Webb and his crew.
I've been doing this with helicopters for about 22 years.
16 crew members.
We've got guys from all over the country.
Traveling state to state with their logging equipment, their helicopter, and of course, the essentials.
We're all pretty good friends, yeah.
Their current stop, Mount Eldon in Flagstaff, where they are cutting and flying trees to thin out the forest. Once the trees are cut down and helicoptered off of the mountain, the loggers take them and put them into large decks like behind me. They're taller than me and they actually extend the entire length of this road. And this is just one of many decks that the loggers have put together.
This is a really important project. It's really a fuels reduction project trying to eliminate the threat of catastrophic fire and flooding.
Before this thinning, the trees were growing so closely together that it became a fire hazard.
A lot of times people's vision of a forest is just a really dense stand of trees, which actually in this area is not true natural conditions for the forest.
Beyond wildfire protection, the thinning is also keeping Flagstaff drinking water clean.
If there was a fire and a lot of sediment got in the water, really would be unusable for drinking water.
It's all these reasons and more why Flagstaff officials worked to make this labor-intensive and expensive project happen.
Per hour, it's thousands of dollars. So we have to keep we got to keep things moving.
While staying safe, because logging is extremely dangerous.
Did you want to sneak up here a little closer, Pat?
But it's nothing new for the loggers.
This is all normal for us, yeah. This is every day, what happens every day.
On Mount Eldon, Nicole Hernandez, Cronkite News.
The thinning process is costing millions of dollars, part of which is coming from taxpayer pockets.
The helicopter is phase 2 of the overall project and is expected to be completed mid-May.
Many cities in the U.S. have created plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and more to address climate change. Phoenix is among them.
As Cronkite News reporter Jennifer Alvarez reports, more Arizona cities are jumping on board instead of waiting for federal intervention.
Phoenix has had a climate action plan for years. The city is working toward clean energy in buildings, zero waste, clean transportation, and more.
Currently today, we're degrading our systems, our rivers, our streams, our oceans, our air, often using air just like a landfill. And so you see the brown cloud around Phoenix, like we need to do things about that.
One of those things is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Phoenix by 30% by 2025. Tempe is just starting its climate action plan.
We want to leave Tempe better than we found it.
It's a movement seen across the globe. Cities are tackling climate change on their own rather than wait for federal or state government. More than 9,000 cities have joined the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy to commit to climate action initiatives. Mark Hartman, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Phoenix, says climate action isn't something cities should hide from.
The message often with climate is like, oh, this is horrible, this is duck and cover. No, actually, this is like, imagine if we can actually go and use innovation and be reducing waste by 80% and 90%. Like, wouldn't that be awesome?
Hartman says climate action plans can help cities spend less in the future and taxpayers reap savings.
Here we are, we're buying renewable energy, and it's actually costing us less.
Braden Kay, Tempe's sustainability director, says cities should also think about communities that could be affected by climate change.
How do we make sure that low-income communities and communities on the margin have resources to invest in energy efficiency?
State climatologist Nancy Sullivan agrees.
So it's really hot in the daytime. So a lot of people can just go in the air conditioning, no big deal. A lot of people can't. A lot of the people who are in a fixed income or have a low income, some of them don't have working air conditioning at all.
Tempe's climate action plan will focus on sustainable energy, transportation, and extreme heat. And Kay says these initiatives are ultimately about helping everyone.
If we don't help raise all boats, then our climate actions that we're taking won't really matter.
Cities aren't the only ones paying close attention to climate change. Last week, signs pleading for reform and young faces flooded rallies across the world.
Step up and do something about climate change or get the heck out of the way.
Arizona youth say lawmakers should do something about climate change, and they should do it now.
This is a national emergency, and we cannot let them forget it.
Aditi Narayanan, one of the organizers for the youth climate strike in Arizona, says people need to know the effects of climate change.
People think climate change is just a glacier melting up in the North Pole, but I want to illustrate that it's affecting them, that extreme heat patterns, that drought, that directly affects them in their livelihoods and their health.
And students say it's up to them to stand up to climate change when no one else will.
As the youth, we are the people that are going to be affected by this. And so it is important for us to take a stand when the adults refuse to come to the table and fight for us.
Say they're pushing for the Green New Deal, which aims to move to 100% clean energy, create sustainable jobs, and support sustainable businesses. Live in the Broadcast Center, Jennifer Alvarez, Cronkite News.
How does climate impact tree growth? As reporter Alexis Hermanson explains, a recently released global study shows that water is a factor.
2018 was the fourth hottest year on record, and those temperatures affect trees. In 2017, tree cover loss amounted to 39 million acres just in the tropics. That's the loss of 40 football fields of trees every minute for an entire year. But as Dr. David Frank from the University of Arizona explains, new research shows water also impacts trees. That's evident, he says, in the boreal forest in Canada and Russia.
And this is pointing to the ever-increasing importance of moisture availability for our forests across larger and larger areas of the globe.
Frank and his team were part of an international study that used tree ring samples from 2 different time periods.
The work itself relied very heavily upon what's called the International Tree Ring Data Bank.
That data bank has worldwide tree ring samples. Researchers looked at samples from more than 2,700 sites. Every year the tree grows a ring, and the wider they are could indicate the tree had a wetter year.
Some of the individual biological variation is averaged out to understand how the trees and forests as a whole is responding to climate and weather variation.
This map shows that precipitation was a larger driver than temperature in tree ring growth between 1930 to 1960 and 1960 to 1990.
Understanding how they're responding to climate variation is important, not only for if you think about our national parks, but also forest resources, how we're using wood, and the sorts of landscapes that we as society live on.
At the Tree Ring Lab, Alexis Hermanson, Cronkite News.
Future research will include comparing tree ring data with satellite observations and computer models that show how climate affects vegetation. Here in the desert, it takes a lot of water to keep plants looking healthy throughout the year. The town of Gilbert has a program to help landscapers use their water efficiently, helping save millions of gallons each year. Cronkite News reporter Nicole Hernandez shows us the tools landscapers are using to make this happen.
HMS Landscaping took me to a water leak in the Santan Village irrigation system.
I thought it was here, but
The leak caused this mess, but more than that, it wasted water. The property is considered water-wise according to the town of Gilbert, meaning the site's landscapers use their water efficiently.
It can be hard.
Hard to find a balance between conserving water and keeping the plants healthy.
Managing the water per the seasons, not overwatering, not underwatering. It can be a challenge.
But Gilbert has a program to make finding that balance a bit easier.
We want to help people make sure they're using the right amount of water.
To do that, they give participants a budget that outlines how much water they should be using. Then they monitor water usage, updating participants every month with new budget information. On average, Gilbert is saving about 200 million gallons of water each year.
That is probably enough. Let's see, that would be enough to serve water to about 600 homes.
It also saves participants the money they would have spent on the wasted water. But it's not always simple for the landscapers to reduce how much water they use.
We can only go so far with that without, the property looking stressed out.
For HMS Landscaping, it's all about finding the right tool for the job.
So if a plant's missing, we plug it so we don't waste water.
Santan Village is one of 62 sites considered water-wise. In Gilbert, Nicole Hernandez, Cronkite News.
The program is designed for commercial landscaping, but Gilbert has online tools for residents to use if they're interested in saving water.
It's finally warming up here in the valley, which means perfect weather for hiking. So Cronkite News reporter Claire Kelly went out to take a closer look at some of the colorful things you might come across while visiting Arizona state parks.
Without rain, there can't be flowers. But as you all know, Arizona has had a lot of rain over the past couple of months.
Because we had so much rain this winter, the Arizona state parks are not only very green and lush, but they are also shaping up for a beautiful wildflower season. I went on a hike with State Park Ranger Matt Downs in Lost Dutchman State Park to check out all of the wildflowers that are already starting to bloom.
So some of the wildflower species that we have here in Arizona somewhat depend on elevation. So when we were higher up on the mountain, we were seeing a higher variety of some of the wildflower species. Seen a lot more lupins. We're seeing some fillery, but down here as you come off the mountain, for the most part, you're really only seeing a lot of the brittle bush out here. Every once in a while, you'll find some of the smaller species that are kind of just hanging out independently, but for the most part, you're just kind of seeing brittle bush. So that's why it's nice if you're ever going to come into the park, try to head up a little higher. You're actually going to kind of get your money's worth of wildflowers.
When going on your hike, make sure to take some pictures. Photographer Amy Horn gives us some tips on shooting wildflowers.
You tend to have more success for the flowers in the morning because if we're going to have any wind that day, first thing in the morning you tend to have less wind. And if you're trying to take a close-up picture of flowers, if the wind is blowing, it's going to move your subject and cause a blurry image. So I would recommend morning photography, use the tripod, and get out there and just notice everything around you.
It is not illegal to pick the flowers, but it is illegal to take anything out of a state park.
You can kind of see that it's already starting to wilt and die off, and now no one else gets to see this flower pretty much. It'll break down and kind of go back into the earth, but we always say don't pick the wildflowers for your grandchildren. It's kind of like the saying that a lot of places like to say.
Besides Lost Dutchman State Park, you can also find wildflowers in bloom at Catalina State Park and Lake Pleasant Regional Park. Claire Kelly, Cronkite News.
One of Arizona's most iconic images is the saguaro cactus. But as Melanie Porter explains, the saguaro's slow growth is both a strength and a weakness.
It's a typical day in the desert. The sun is shining, birds are chirping, and looming in the background, the king of desert plants, the saguaro cactus, stands tall.
So one of the things that I think people don't always appreciate about the saguaro is how slow growing it is, and the fact that we don't get, unlike other plants, we don't get a crop of saguaros every single year.
In fact, it's so slow growing that the reign of this iconic plant could be over in the future because young plants are so fragile.
A cactus that's 10 years old is only this big, and that's pretty easy to mash or destroy, and it's going to take 10 years to get this big again.
Mature saguaro are thriving right now because around 50 years ago, Arizona went through a cooling period which allowed them to grow. However, with inconsistent rain patterns and climbing temperatures, young saguaro can no longer survive this Arizona climate.
In the Sonoran Desert and the Tucson area is that we have been getting warmer temperatures, and so the trend is towards warmer temperatures, drier soils, and we think that's what's affecting the establishment of these new young saguaros.
With this desert necessity slowly fading, it may present problems for animals that depend on it for food and shelter.
They live so long, that does allow for the desert to be more resilient.
But for now, we can bet on the fact that the saguaro's slow growth is its greatest strength. In Tucson, I'm Melanie Porter, Cronkite News.
That's it for this special edition of Cronkite News tonight. Thanks for joining us. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.